friends, welcome to another video tutorial from Shomu's Biology. In this video lecture, I'll be talking about pedigree analysis. And I already recorded some video regarding how to find out whether the pedigree is dominant, recessive or autosomal or X-linked. You can watch that video anytime. But this video is going to be an overview of all those different pedigree types, how to find out them, and then how to solve some examples of pedigree analysis. So let's start with it. Before understanding of pedigree analysis, you should know what is pedigree. Pedigree is a representation of a family tree or family history of diseases that we usually analyze based on how those diseases are transferred from their parents to the next generations and offsprings. Now if you look at those charts, it is going to give us an idea about the way the disease transferred and the type of the transfer of the disease that are known as inheritance patterns. Okay, and there are 4 types of inheritance patterns possible. First is based on whether the gene that is being transferred is dominant or recessive, or whether the gene is present in the autosomal chromosome or in the sex chromosome or X chromosome. Okay, now you know that, let's say we are talking about a disease, and the disease here we are talking about the gene A is causing a disease. Now capital A is the dominant form, so if the gene is present as capital A, it is causing the disease. Okay, so now the disease could be 2 types. It could be dominant format or recessive type. It could be autosomal, that means this disease gene is carried by a body cell chromosome, or X-linked, that means this gene can be present in the X chromosome of our body. X and Y are the 2 sex chromosomes of our body, which is different than the autosomes, which are 22 pairs. Okay, so now all the varieties of this disease and inheritance patterns could be represented by the combination of these 4 types. So let's look at them. First, it could be dominant autosomal, so we call it autosomal dominant. Second one, autosomal with recessive type, so carried by the autosomes and autosomal chromosomes, but it is in recessive format. Third one is X-linked dominant, so present in the X chromosome, but the disease is a dominant type. Fourth one, X-linked recessive, when it is also carried in the X chromosome, but it is in recessive format. So we have 4 types of disease inheritance patterns that are possible. For any of the pedigree that we got in the exams and times to provide to answer, we will check for all these 4 types to find out which among these 4 is best fit for that pedigree to explain. So let's look at examples. So there are certain rules to find out the type of pedigree that we usually know. First is the autosomal dominant. For the autosomal dominant type of pedigree, there are some rules to find out how. Autosomal dominant disorders affect children, usually have affected parent. So if your father is affected, you should be affected. That is the idea of autosomal dominant. That means you'll never see 2 partners, none of them had the disease, but suddenly one of their offspring get the disease. For an autosomal trait, this will not happen. Affected children usually should have affected parent. Okay, now 2 affected parent can produce unaffected child, so it might happen that 2 affected parents can have affected child. This thing is possible for autosomal dominant. Okay, 2 unaffected parent will never have affected children. This should never happen for an autosomal trait or autosomal dominant pedigree. So for autosomal dominant, what you should find out is that if it's an autosomal trait, you will find out that this disease should be spread across the male as well as female populations almost equally. Okay, that is the biggest example of autosomal trait. While X-linked traits usually tend to be more towards the male populations. So males are much prone to get the X-linked diseases compared to the female because they have only one X chromosome. Now this is the thing that I want you to remember. So two parents affected, none of the children affected. Two parents unaffected, the children affected, it is not possible. So if this scenario originates, it means it's a recessive disease. If this occurs, it is a dominant disease. Okay, so let me erase and let's go to the second type, which is autosomal recessive pedigree chart. In the autosomal recessive disorders, most of the affected children have their don't have any affected parent. See, most of the affected children have normal parents. So normal parents will give rise to affected children. This is known as, this is a part of recessive type of trait. And if it's a recessive trait, it will not show up in every generation. It can skip generations. That is the ultimate idea of recessive trait. It will not show up every time. As you see, this is the generation where you have the trait shown. In the next generations, no traits are shown. And again afterwards, in another generation, it's shown again. Okay? And as it is autosomal, it means both males and females are affected with equal frequency. The third type is the X-linked recessive pedigree. X-linked pedigree means it is mostly affecting males, and importantly, X-linked recessive pedigree, X-linked recessive diseases affect more males compared to the females. So in a population, you will see most of the males are getting the disease. As this is recessive, it can skip generations. Another important thing is that this disease is transferred from the mother to son. Okay. The fourth type is the X-linked dominant pedigree. X-linked dominant pedigree is, again, if a father is affected, then all the daughters will be affected. But in X-linked recessive pedigree, this trait will never transfer from father to son. It will never transfer. X-linked recessive disease always transfer from mother to son, father to daughter. Now X-linked dominant, if father is affected, all their daughters will be affected, because if father is affected, it has only one X, and the chromosome that father supplies to the daughter is that X. So if father is affected, that means that if X is affected, it is going to give that X to the daughter, and if it's dominant in nature, so it is going to express the disease, right? So these are the different rules and ideas to how to actually guess a pedigree by looking at it. But again, all these methods are not always foolproof, because if you see a pedigree for a small area, that can be explained by one or multiple type of traits, like multiple type of inheritance patterns can fit to explain that pedigree as well. This type of situations may originate. But for releasing that idea and for actually releasing all those complications, you need to look as far as you can for a pedigree to analyze, as back as you can through the track of the family history, and as back as you go, as more people will be involved and the pedigree becomes larger and bigger, you are getting more closer to find out the right type of inheritance for any gene or any disease gene or any other gene that we are looking for. Okay, so now we will solve some sort of pedigree related problems. Let's solve this one. As you see here, we see here in this, looking at this pedigree, that this disease, this black shade means they have a diseased gene. The diseased gene is present both in male as well as in female, so it's well distributed. We see another thing, that in third generation, mother, father not affected, mother and father, and none of their children are affected. It's good. If one of them affected, it's going to transfer it. So the idea, if we look at very clearly, we see every generation has the disease. If there is a diseased organism, diseased individual, it is transferring the disease. It is not skipping generations. So it's mostly dominant type. Another thing, that this disease is well distributed between male and female both. So it is not X-linked, it is autosomal. So we can say this is an autosomal dominant trait. Okay. Now let's see whether we can explain this trait with autosomal dominant feature. So autosomal dominant means, let's say A is the disease gene. So if capital A present, it means disease. If capital A small a present, it also means disease. The only way disease is not there if it have the genotype small a. So look at here in the first case. It could be either capital A or capital A small a. This one could be capital A or capital A small a. Now as you look at the offspring, so one of them did not get the disease. So this is the indication. Two affected parents, but the child is not having the disease. The only way it is possible if the trait is autosomal dominant. If it's autosomal recessive, then obviously this child is going to get the disease. Okay? So that is why it is a full proof that this trait is dominant autosomal. So if we look at here, it should be small a to not get the disease. So as it's getting two small a, that means both of their parents should have at least one small a. So we are sure that both the parents contain capital A small a genotype. Okay. Now let's say it can have like that. Now as we have small a, this one also small a, all the offsprings are small a. So we are explaining this whole pedigree well with autosomal dominant. So we are now full proof to say this is an autosomal dominant trait. This is the second pedigree that we are looking at. Let's look at it. First thing that we want to look, whether it's an autosomal or X-linked. How do you find it out? Whether the distribution pattern. See, 1, 2, 3, 4 males affected, 1, 2, 3, 4 females are affected. So 50-50 distribution. There's no way it is going to be an X-linked. So it is obviously another autosomal trait. Now let's look another thing. Here if you see very carefully, you will find neither mother nor father are affected. None of them are affected. But one of their child is affected. What does that mean? Mother, father, parents don't have the disease, children have the disease. The only way it's possible if the disease is following autosomal recessive trait, isn't it? I told you about this rule earlier. These rules are golden for guessing this whole pedigree very fast. You don't need to actually calculate through all of that to get there. I show you one example how much time it consumes to calculate this whole thing. So this type of rules will actually help you to get to the depth. So it is autosomal recessive pedigree. Let's move to the third kind. In this pedigree, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 males affected, 3 females affected. Now, by looking at this, we can tell it could be either autosomal or sex-linked. The chances for sex-linked are rare because it's kind of distributed between both male and female. But let's look at it in further details. You see here, the disease is transferred from mother to son. And here, both of them, mother and father, are affected. And all the children are affected. So if mother and father both affected and affecting all their children, that means it is a form of dominant pedigree is a dominant trait, and you also see this is in every generation mostly. But if you look at here, mother and father are not affected but one of the child is affected. Again, this means it is a kind of recessive. So this pedigree is kind of puzzling and it's hard to explain with all our rules. It could be either autosomal or sex linked, it could be dominant or recessive. How could you answer that? Now this type of puzzling pedigree can be there in your exams. How to solve them? Now let's take some more rules into the play, into the action. See here, the disease is transferred from the father to son. Father is affected, son are also affected. And I told you earlier, it's a golden rule that if X-linked recessive disease is there, it should never transfer from father to son. So it is definitely not X-linked recessive. Now as we see, mother to son transfer is going on. Here also mother to son transfer is going on. So, and here also you see a son is affected. There is a chance that one of the mother can be a carrier of the disease who is transferring it. Carrier means if it's a recessive form of the disease, the carrier can transfer the disease to the next generation, right? So this type of pedigrees you can't really explain well with either of our ideas. So based on that, what we can find, it is not X-linked because it is not X-linked dominant, it is not X-linked recessive. Now if it is X-linked, it is autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive. Let's take that one in the case. So it is definitely not X-linked, we know that it is autosomal. Among autosomal, either it could be dominant or it would be recessive. Now if it's a dominant, then obviously this thing will not result, right? If it's a dominant trait, then two parent, none of them getting the disease, will not get a diseased offspring, right? It is only possible in case of recessive disease, right? And in recessive disease, though two parents are affected, all the individuals, all the offsprings are affected. This is rare, but we can get this disease. So the only way to explain this pedigree is autosomal recessive trait. So take this one in this account, autosomal recessive. Now in this type of pedigree where you have confusion, you need to test your theory there. If it's an autosomal recessive trait, then how can you explain? You take here, so the disease will show up, let's say the disease gene is small a. So the disease will show up if small a is present, that is in recessive format. Now this is again capital A small a or capital A, we don't know, but in either way it's not showing any disease. In the next generations we have this affected, we have this one affected. So definitely as for affected and affected, right? Yeah. So as these two individuals are affected, that means obviously the father should have a small a coming in. So we know the sure that the genotype for the father will be capital A small a, right? So now if it's capital A small a, this mother could be capital A small a, this one also could be capital A small a, for example. Now capital A small a means it's a carrier, so it is not getting the disease, but it carries the small a gene and transfer it to the next generation and cause it to show the disease. It's marrying another healthy man over here, and that is capital A or capital A small a. Now if they marry together, one of their child is getting the disease, so small a should be the genotype. So to become the genotype small a, the new person who this woman will marry should have a small a. So we know for sure the genotype for this person will be capital A small a. And then we can explain rest of them very clearly. So yes, with the help of autosomal recessive pedigree, autosomal recessive inheritance, we can actually explain this whole pedigree. That is how we can go. So for this complicated one, you can go for this approach of finally checking them. Now the fourth one, the fourth type of pedigree, let's see that. This is the last one we want to solve. So here you see males are affected less, females are affected more. Okay, and again in this case kind of distributed between male and female. And here you see one important thing, that the disease is transferred to the daughter from the father. This is a very important golden rule. The disease is transferred from father to daughter. So if one father is affected, all the daughters will be affected. Remember what kind of pedigree we are talking about? X-linked dominant. In case of X-linked dominant, whenever you see this idea that father is affected and all the daughters are affected, it means X-linked dominant. Without anything, you can put X-linked dominant and that is correct. Okay, and in X-linked dominant, the distribution is kind of fine between male and female. Okay, and you see this is more transferred here from mother to son, less, but from father to daughter, all the daughters are getting the disease. So we can easily write that down as X-linked dominant over here. This is how you should solve all the pedigree questions. Okay, I hope this video helped you to understand how to solve pedigree questions, both using the rules as well as using the traditional methods. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel to get more videos like that, and share this video with your friends. Thank you.